The African penguins, you know, like all penguins, a little black and white. They all have individual characteristics, spot patterns. The African penguins have spot patterns on their chest. They ID themselves as personal. It's just like a fingerprint.
They all have their specific characters and little personalities. And I always like to tell people about their different personalities because it gives you empathy for them.
If anything, the African penguin is an incredibly good indicator organism. What that means is that it lets us know, as researchers or scientists, as well as the general fishing public, where potential fish stocks are, as well as how the population is doing. It lets us know how many fish there are in the oceans. If, for example, the population isn't doing well, then there aren't enough fish in the ocean. And that's pretty cool about the African penguin from our side, at least.
All right, so the African penguin, especially in Algoa Bay, is known as an indicator species. Proudly, you know, the ambassador of the environment, because it's kind of in the middle of the food chain. It does represent the health of the entire environment. And like any species, if you take that species out of the food chain or out of the environment, it will have tremendous effects on the rest of the environment.
Mainly in the past, the threats that have hit the African penguin have been guano collection. Penguin poop makes incredibly good gunpowder and fertilizer. From there, going onto the islands and taking away all of this poop, it's removed a lot of the shelter that these penguins depend upon.
I think in the 1700s there were 5 or 6 million of these animals or birds. Their main habitat, or their only habitat at that time, was islands. And they, interestingly enough, used to make nesting burrows in their own guano, in heaps of guano. Guano keeps parasites out and keeps predators out, and interestingly enough is quite well ventilated. So they've evolved with this system. Then the humans came along and removed the guano, which challenged the breeding success of the penguins. They had no longer had burrows or breeding habitat, so they often made nests in outside, open to the elements, rain, flooding, predators, etc. So that was a challenge.
And the guano harvest, you know, they were going through and they're nesting in guano. So now you're disturbing the nests and taking away their opportunities to nest in that area and forcing them to find other areas to nest. Therefore, not getting the frequency of nesting that you're doing to being able to, you know, now the birds are off schedule. And that carries on for another decade or so.
Penguin nests on the islands were used to harvest eggs. Well, the sailors used to harvest eggs from the nests. Millions of eggs were harvested each year. Obviously, no eggs, no recruitment, no new chicks. So that was a massive blow to penguins.
The Europeans were harvesting the eggs for food. There was, to harvest the eggs, when you go to a colony, you have to eliminate all the old eggs because you don't know how old they are or how fresh they are. So they eliminated all those eggs. Therefore, that was one total hatch of over 500,000 nests that were eliminated.
Luckily, in the late 1960s, the utilization of any penguin material was stopped. Unfortunately, overfishing, pollution, and climate change, all human-induced, have had major impacts on the population.
Because they're nesting up on the surface, because of the effects of the guano scraping, trying to get a hold of fish in our overfished seas. So they have to swim further to get to the fish. Because of climate change, the fish is also moving into deeper and colder waters and also away from the commercial fishing. So these guys are swimming further to get to fish, which means it takes them longer trips to get back to their chicks to feed them. And of course, by the time they get back, they've digested most of this fish that they're now trying to regurgitate to their babies. It also exposes them for longer times at sea.
So we're all harvesting the fish that they depend on. Other marine birds also eat the same fish, and some of the other marine birds are doing reasonably well, so there's quite serious competition. There are expanding populations of seals in the area, which is also putting serious competition or pressure on the fish stocks. At the moment, South Africa isn't managing a multi-species recruitment model or management model for the small pelagic fish species that are its primary food source. So each fish species is managed in isolation, which is a challenge.
They're working harder, there's more environmental issues. They can get caught in those fishing nets, which, you know, when they're dragging this trawling net through the ocean and birds are trying to swim through, navigating, trying to get around these nets, they can get caught. You know, all their prey of what they're wanting to eat is getting caught in that net, so they're going to go towards that net. These birds are out foraging for food, and they run into, they eat, grab a fish, pop up to the surface of the water, pop up in an oil slick, and now they're covered with oil. That is that will break down the natural waterproofing of the birds. And if they ingest it, they're poisoning themselves. If they, because they're going to try cleaning themselves, they're going to try preening themselves, they're going to ingest it.
One of South Africa's deepest industrial ports was built about 7 kilometers away from the biggest population of African penguin in the world. And that's here in Port Elizabeth. And it became a case of not if an oil spill happens, but when it happens. And do we have the expertise as well as the facilities to be able to deal with such an oil spill? To give an idea of the impact that oil spills can have, there's been 2 oil spills in South African history, 2 major ones, both off the Cape Town coast, one in 1994 and one in 2000. And both those 2 oil spills have killed over 30,000 penguin individuals, which is a major amount considering that the population is sitting at 45,000 at the moment.
So oil spills are the very publicized events. This is usually due to the big numbers. So oil spill will not affect 1 or 2 penguins, it will affect thousands of penguins at a time. One of our biggest oil spills, the Treasure oil spill off the coast of Cape Town, affected nearly 40,000 birds, and it was also the biggest oiled wildlife response to date. So it's quite an impactful experience. It does ruin their waterproofing capabilities. Their feathers get waterlogged, they get hypothermia, and ultimately they can't feed if they can't go into the ocean with their waterproofing.
We had a serious oil spill in the early 2000s. And effectively the entire population that lives today was actually cleaned of oil in those days, which means there were more penguins available, but the total number was the same. So that's quite a scary statistic. Once the penguins have been oiled, there's debate about whether their breeding success is impacted on. So there are, once again, major oil spills are noted, but small oil spills are often not picked up.
Very important thing to know that I want people to know is that the African penguin is in the situation it is because of human intervention, and that it's not going to get out of the predicament it is without human intervention. So organizations like SANCOB, like Sandparks, that are actively spending their time trying to recover this population needs the support.
I think, as with any endangered animal, as with any animal that is going extinct, it would be a travesty to not have something as big and as charismatic as the African penguin, let alone any penguin, is something for future generations to never see again. And that's a very sad tale.
Looking at the bigger environmental picture, if there is no more penguin, that also means there was no more fish. So that makes a big impact on the human life as well, because we are getting into trouble with fish stocks. And if the penguin has no more fish, it won't take long for us not to have fish, which is a very big major food source and a big part of the economy in South Africa as well.
The way that anybody can help any of these oceans, any of the causes that we have, is education, creating that awareness. That awareness is absolutely key, because if you don't know what is happening in your world, well, you can't exactly help it. So creating that education, creating that awareness, and learning about all these various things is incredibly important. From there, change can happen.
I think it's a reflection on humanity for a species to go extinct, especially if our actions actually result in the extinction. I think people should understand that and should be committed to assisting us to understand why the animal is going extinct and what human behavior has created the problem and how to address the human behavior and fix it. I think they should also understand that the African penguin forms a unique part of the ecosystem here in the Western Cape, the cold temperate marine ecosystem. And I think its interaction with the other species forms part of the ecosystem as is, and it's one of the building blocks of the ecosystem, that if you pull it out, there's no way of understanding what the implications will be. So by allowing the penguin to go extinct and then the rhino and maybe the abalone, we slowly but surely are pulling away the building blocks of the ecosystems, not knowing exactly when the crash will be and not knowing what the implication of that crash will be to our survival, well, the survival of the planet and more simply for the survival of the human being.
What are some things that we can do to help here in the United States? Well, I think one of the things that we could probably do is look at the way we consume seafood. Go with, when we're out in a restaurant and such, and we're buying food to go back to our houses and stuff and provide for our families, I think we ought to look at more sustainable ways, more sustainable seafood. Looking at, there's a big national program by the Monterey Bay Aquarium called Seafood Watch. We're a proud member of Seafood Watch, and we promote Seafood Watch throughout the Midwest. We provide these cards and information that each one of us that visit the aquarium can go home and with this card and be able to choose responsibly the fish that we want to eat, the shrimp that we want to eat, the shellfish we want to eat, all through looking at this card. They have a wonderful app on, for your phone as well, which is pretty cool. I don't use that as much. I'm a little older than that. But just by being able to responsibly, choose the fishes, then we're not creating that demand. If we create a demand, the industry wants to make money. And so that's what's going on. If we can slowly move away from taking wild fishes and eating more sustainable, aquaculture, farmed fishes, farmed seafoods, I think the marine environments will be more healthy for us and for all the animals that live in those environments around the world.
So organizations like Sandcob, like Sand Parks, that are actively spending their time trying to recover this population needs the support. So we have a website which you can go onto to wherever you are in the world, just to donate that little bit. We can't do it without the money and the support to do our jobs. So on our website you can also adopt a penguin, which is quite exciting. You can pick a picture and that penguin gets a name that you choose for it. So of course the idea is that then you give that money towards that specific penguin to be rehabilitated and released back into the wild.
I think on a broader scale, the rest of South Africa, globally, we all need to hold hands and actually contribute towards the conservation of the African penguin. If you leave it to often third world government departments, they might not be able to actually do it. And it doesn't really help us all watching and saying, oh shame, they can't do it and we'll just watch them and watch the animal go extinct. So I think we need to start contributing.
What would the world look like without African penguins? Well, you know what, we may have our chance to see that. And what would it look like? It would probably be very depressing, to only have African penguins in a zoo or an aquarium or a conservation facility, and only having, the couple thousand birds that we have in our institutions right now, working on these programs to kind of make sure we create an awareness and prevent this from happening. But you know what? We don't want to see that. So, and hopefully as long as I'm alive, that the African penguins will be alive.